Hi everybody, this is Noelle from Petitti's, and today we're going to talk about begonias. It is our begonia spotlight, and basically everything that you see here is an annual type begonia. Don't get me wrong, there's some foliage types here too and flowering types, but what's really great about the annual begonias is that you can bring them inside over the winter and use them as houseplants. It doesn't matter what type, what variety, they can all come inside and grow them as houseplants over the winter. So that's great, okay? First thing that you need to know to be successful with begonias is gonna be their sun conditions. So really all of them do very well in part shade, okay? Part shade is 4 to 6 hours of direct sunlight, okay? And normally you'll find that eastern exposure, sometimes western exposure just for a few hours, again, 4 hours or so, or if you have a shady area where a tree is shading an area. So do remember, part shade is really best for these, but there are so many new varieties and hybrids that some of them can grow in full sun to full shade. So we'll talk about those when we start talking about all these varieties. So part shade's the best. Some of them can take full sun to full shade, and we'll talk about that. Okay, next thing that is really important with begonias is their soil, and it has got to be well drained. They cannot sit in wet, clayey soil. So you can plant them in containers with a great potting mix that is draining out for you, no problem. You can plant them in the soil, but you better make sure that it is a raised area where the soil has, is draining out, or it has been amended so that water is draining away from the root system. Some of these begonias are tuberous begonias, so that means they actually have a tuber planted in the soil. And whenever you get a tuber wet, it'll just rot right there, and then the plant will not survive from that. Same thing with some of these begonias. They just have fibrous root systems, but same thing, if the soil stays too wet, those roots are gonna rot and that plant will not survive. So again, keep that in mind. It's gotta be well-drained soil. They like it rich and amended and fertile. So, definitely make sure that you're adding your compost element and definitely fertilize. So you can fertilize your begonias with either plant tone or Osmocote, whatever you'd prefer to use. And somebody asked about which Osmocote we'd recommend for annual bedding flowers. I'm gonna tell you the green cap, the 1414 is really great for your flowering plants in general. Okay, so keep that in mind. Next thing besides sun and soil is we wanna make sure that you're taking care of the watering, but it's kind of the same thing. With begonias, you want that soil to be evenly moist and thoroughly watered, don't get me wrong, but before you reapply water, make sure that we usually say the top inch of soil is dry to the touch. So make sure you're inserting your finger about an inch into the soil and then making sure that it's coming out and it is dry. Also, when you're growing these in containers, if you just see the container, the soil in the container, just slightly pull away from the edge, that's a really good indication that it can be rewatered again. Out in the landscape beds or garden beds, again, just make sure that it is on the drier side of watering before you repeat water. Again, we can't have them have wet feet. And most begonias have very, very succulent, sort of leathery foliage, very, very succulent stems on them too. So they're holding a lot of water in their foliage, in their stems, in their bodies. So again, they just don't need a ton of water out there. Okay, great. The next thing that I think you should all know, and I always mention this with begonias, is that the more you care for them, deadhead them, and so forth, the better they will perform for you. Especially with large flowering types like this tuberous begonia, when those large flowers get wet and start to die back, they're holding on to a lot of moisture, and so disease and insects will come to that area. So if you can remove those flowers, those spent flowers, as often as possible, that's always going to help kind of rejuvenate the plant, put the energy back into the stem, the foliage, and what have you, so it can develop more buds and blooms for you. And that really goes with any of your annual plants. Yes, they're all very vigorous, and yes, they will continue to produce flowers for you, but it's always gives them a cleaner appearance, a healthier appearance when you can go through and deadhead, and begonias really react very, very well to that. Okay, another thing about begonias that's interesting is you can propagate them fairly easy from a leaf cutting and also a stem cutting. So literally taking a full leaf cutting, dipping it in rooting hormone, placing it in, again, a very well-drained potting soil or even a perlite mixture, going ahead and keeping that evenly moist, but those plants will root fairly quickly for you. So keep that in mind if you do want to propagate some of your begonias. A leaf cutting or a stem cutting works fairly well and fairly quickly. If you'd like to try growing begonias from seed, that's fine. It can take up to 4 months for that seed to actually develop. So if you've got some patience, go ahead and do it that way. But it can take a little bit of work and a little bit of time on your part. Let's talk about attributes with begonias. And I think probably one of the best attributes is that they really do provide a ton of color, foliage, color and contrast and texture, and just low maintenance plants for shade. So they really are an excellent shade option out there in the garden. Like I mentioned earlier, some of these begonias can actually take full sun conditions. You just might have to pay a little bit more attention to the watering and keep those soils evenly moist to slightly dry, and just keep an eye on it. But for the most part, they're a great option for shady gardens. I will have to say that they are fairly good as far as deer resistance. They don't seem to come through and browse begonias as often as, let's say, something like an impatient in the garden. So that's a good thing as well. And again, with all the different textures, the heavier the texture, the more leathery the leaf texture, that's always a good indicator of having less deer browsing out there in the garden. Also, the fuzzier the leaf. So some of these varieties, like the Tuberous begonias, they do have definitely a rougher leaf texture, more scalloped or toothy edges on them too. So that helps in the long run. I will say with begonias, once they start blooming, they really are non-stop performers. So they just keep on going regardless if you're deadheading or not. They just kind of grow through and stay vigorous. Of course, continuing to fertilize and stay on a fertilizer schedule is going to help with that continuous blooming. But for the most part, once they start, they really don't stop until we get into the fall months. Other than that, I think let's talk about varieties here. There are many begonias out there that have a tuberous root system to them. And so therefore, you can use them as a house plant and winter them over indoors and grow them all throughout the winter months, and that's fine. Just know that the tuberous varieties will start to slow down and may go dormant, where they're going to start to yellow and lose their leaves, and that's okay. Those tuberous varieties can also be overwintered like you would a tender bulb. So things like dahlias and cannas, no problem. You can pack them in dry peat moss, perlite, newspaper, whatever you have around, in a breathable container. So we talk about using cardboard boxes with some holes, or if you'd like to use like a Tupperware type container or a Rubbermaid type container, make sure that there are some air circulation holes in that container, okay? You can, again, winter them over, but you wanna make sure that you're digging your begonias before that first fall frost, where it does get very, very cold. These plants are very sensitive to those late frosts, so you wanna dig before that happens, okay? Keep that in mind. Tuberous begonias here, I have Iconia variety. The Iconia varieties are fairly new, like the last few years here. And you'll see they all have a very dark scalloped leaf, very clean appearance, very compact, and then these lovely doubled flowers. So very, very showy. This is a hot coral color, but they come in yellows and pinks and reds and other colors as well. This one is very unique. This is the exhibition series, and they almost have a peony-like bloom to them. They are some of the largest flowering tuberous begonias out there. This is a pink Picardy type where you see the edge in white, and they are absolutely lovely. They do require some staking, this exhibition type, because those flowers are so heavy that they can kind of pull the begonia over. So do be aware of that you want to make sure that you're staking these upright just because the flowers are so heavy. And then you have nonstop begonias, which are probably the most familiar or most classic tuberous type. This is a nonstop. It is actually a mocha type because it has a dark leaf to it. The nonstop begonias come in a green leaf or a dark leaf like mocha here. This is mocha orange. And what's really great about these plants is that they will go through and have double blooms, sometimes single blooms. It just kind of depends, but it really makes this flowering plant look so different out there in the garden, and so many hot colors and rainbows of colors, white included, yellow, orange, pink, red. They just look gorgeous out there. And you'll commonly see some of the tuberous begonias in hanging baskets because they have a little bit of a semi-trailing habit along with the Iconia as well. Okay, your typical begonia that I think a lot of people think about is the wax begonia, okay? And normally you'll see them as this bedding plant, again, a green leaf or a dark bronze leaf, typically in white, pink, rose, and red, okay? There have been some major developments, and however, these are wonderful, again, long bloomers, really, really great out in there in the garden, but they have developed some larger varieties that are hybrids of the wax begonia. So this one is called Megawatt, and Megawatt, as you can tell, is just a little bit larger than your typical wax begonia. It has a large rounded leaf. They do come in green and bronze leaf types as well. The flowering, of course, is fairly large comparatively to the bedding wax begonia. These are early bloomers, but you also might see something like this, which is called Top Hat. And Top Hat actually has the largest of this type of hybrid begonia bloom. So you can see, whoop, those flowers are really, really big compared to even Megawatt or also the bedding begonias. So look for Top Hat. Back here, I also have an awesome hybrid, and this is Viking. Viking is, as you can tell, a very big begonia, great in the landscape, great in the containers and large hanging baskets as well. And Viking is what we would call an all-weather type begonia. You can grow it in sun, you can grow it in shade. It takes heat, humidity, also some drought, but really all weather and just keeps going and going and going, okay? So you're gonna see those hybrids out there in the garden centers and also out in gardens. Next one I wanted to show you, this is actually a Begonia boliviensis. And boliviensis just meaning it's from Bolivia, and most of your begonia types are going to be from South America, okay? The boliviensis type is very unusual. It has a very thin kind of angel wing or a cut wing leaf. It also has this very pendulous flower, about 5 petals on this flower, and boy, is this a hummingbird attractant. And I hadn't mentioned the begonias as being pollinator attractants. They are because of all of their dark, rich colors. Even the yellows will bring the pollinators in, especially hummingbirds, to their dark oranges and reds. But this one has a nice bell-shaped flower where the hummingbirds can get some nectar. So you will see them definitely around the boliviensis. This one is called Santa Cruz, and there are lots of different varieties of this type. I will have to tell you, they are very vigorous, obviously have more of a trailing or arching habit to them. They will also grow very well in hanging baskets. They look very lovely in that container, but they can also take full sun to full shade and perform very, very well. Rieger Begonias are a great begonia, again, for that part shade to shade condition. They really make a wonderful houseplant. All your begonias are good air purifiers. Riegers can definitely take more of that shady spot. They do great in containers. They do great in landscape beds. They are upright growing, okay? And they have little rosettes of flowers. And I just think they're very, very sweet. They make a great gift plant for anyone as well that can, again, use them inside or out. The Riegers typically have that nice green, clean foliage, a little bit more towards the medium or dark green, but again, very leathery, very nice. Couple of varieties here, as you can tell, but again, rainbow of colors with the Rieger Begonias. Rex Begonias. Rex Begonias are what we'd call a foliage interest begonia. All different shapes and sizes of foliage here, some spiral, some more pointy, but really, really beautiful. Do they bloom? Absolutely. They do produce flowers, but they're usually fairly insignificant compared to their foliage colors and texture. These are a great plant, again, for those shadier spots. I wouldn't really recommend them for those full sun areas. Definitely a great house plant. They can grow in hanging baskets in different containers as well, or out in garden beds, no problem. And again, just a lovely addition to your collection. This one is what we call an angel wing begonia. Beautiful, large, wing-shaped foliage. This one obviously has some beautiful white dots on it. Angel wings are also known as a cane-type begonia, where you see the stems grow upward and they kind of have big inner nodes, just kind of like a bamboo. Angel wing begonia, again, more shade, so would definitely want to be on a shadier side of the garden. Also make an excellent indoor plant. And I should say, for a house plant, most of these guys would appreciate just bright light conditions, but indirect lighting, okay? You really don't need to have direct lighting through a window. So bright indirect is really, really great for them. My favorite out of all these, and I think I mentioned most, is going to be dragon wing. And I have mentioned this plant before numerous times, but dragon wing for me is really the best of all the hybrid begonias. It's got beautiful Kelly green foliage, really beautiful leaf texture, also has that bright red coloring, and the habit to it is a little bit more vase shaped and a little bit of arching or semi-trailing on the edges. And I think it really makes an absolutely glorious hanging basket and is the easiest, I think, as far as begonias are concerned, because you really never have to deadhead it, only ever if it gets damaged in weather or what have you. But for the most part, is a weatherproof begonia, again, where you can grow in full sun to full shade and always be amazed at how well it grows. Winter it over during the winter inside the house, and then take it back outside. It really is a fantastic begonia. Okay, I think I've mentioned most of the begonias here today. We have all of these online as well, so check those out and just enjoy your begonias out there.